Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're here because you like to get past the surface, really understand things thoroughly. And today, we're doing just that with a movie a lot of people know, Patch Adams from 1998, the one with Robin Williams.
And you, our listener, gave us a really fascinating piece to work with. It's a critique almost 4,000 words long about this specific film.
Right.
It's not just a review like thumbs up, thumbs down. It's a deep look at how the movie works, or, well, how the analysis thinks it doesn't work.
Exactly. So our mission today isn't just to talk about the plot. It's to pull out the core insights from this critique.
Yeah.
We want to get what the analysis thinks about the film's portrayal of Dr. Hunter Patch Adams. Its strengths, if any, are noted, and definitely its weaknesses, according to this writer.
And what that tells us about biographical biopics in general.
Right. You shared this analysis with us. Maybe you were curious about that line. The line between telling an inspiring story and sticking to the facts.
And this critique definitely has a strong stance. It starts by acknowledging the film's goal. Dramatizing Dr. Adams' life, his push for humor and compassion in medicine.
Sure, the basic premise.
But then it argues the film just spirals into what it calls a haphazard emotional pageant. Strong words.
Haphazard emotional pageant.
Wow.
Yeah. It mentions shallow characterizations, dramatic manipulation, and even an egregious misrepresentation of people and ethics.
Okay, so it's not holding back.
Not at all.
Let's really get into that. Like you said, it's not just, I didn't like it. The analysis is trying to show why, and it seems like a big part of that is the script itself, the screenwriting.
That's a huge focus. The critique points out how the film relies really heavily on that classic unorthodox outsider cliché.
Yeah. The rebel challenging the system.
Exactly. Patch is the quirky student against the stuffy medical establishment. The critique isn't necessarily saying that template is bad.
Okay.
But it argues the film uses it relentlessly, predictably, like too much, to the point where the critique calls the screenplay a symphony of cliché. That really says something.
It does. It suggests the script just hits all the expected emotional buttons, one after another, so much so that the analysis says it feels almost like a parody of inspiration.
A parody.
Yeah.
Interesting. If they wanted it to be genuinely moving, relying on clichés seems, well, counterintuitive maybe.
That's kind of the point the critique makes.
Yeah.
And it also looks at that core idea in the film. Laughter is the best medicine.
Right. That's the main takeaway message for many people.
But the analysis argues the movie presents this as, like, a radical new idea that basically replaces traditional medicine.
Oh.
Yeah, whereas the critique suggests the real Dr. Adams had a more integrated approach, humor alongside solid medical knowledge, not instead of it.
That feels like a missed opportunity then, doesn't it, for a more nuanced look?
That seems to be the argument. Instead of exploring the how, it just sets up this conflict. And related to that, the critique mentions what it calls emotional exploitation.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
It points to scenes where the emotions feel, well, unearned, forced, or sometimes even contradictory to what the film seems to be saying elsewhere.
Right.
Well, championing emotional connection, but then painting any one part of the system as just cold and robotic without exploring why they might have rules or boundaries.
Yeah.
It's very black and white.
Gotcha. And I remember reading the outline. Wasn't there a big issue with a specific character? Karen Fisher?
Oh, absolutely. The critique really digs into this. It highlights that the character, Karen Fisher, played by Monica Potter, is completely made up. She didn't exist in real life.
Entirely fiction.
Entirely. And her whole tragic storyline, the analysis sees that as a deliberate manipulative addition, just to inject some, heavy drama and make the audience feel something strong. The critique uses the phrase unforgivable distortion about this subplot. That's pretty direct.
Unforgivable distortion. Yeah, that leaves no room for doubt about their opinion. It really makes you think about the ethics of biopics.
It does. How much license is too much, especially when dealing with tragedy.
So moving from the script to the actual characters, the critique wasn't too impressed there either, was it?
Not really. It does acknowledge Robin Williams has incredible charisma, obviously.
Sure.
But the argument is that the script gives him very little to work with besides, quote, platitudes and performative antics.
Okay. Relying on his star power and persona rather than deep character writing.
That's the suggestion.
Yeah.
That it kind of undermines a potentially more thoughtful portrayal of the real Dr. Adams.
And the supporting cast. The critique called them a hollow pantheon. It sounds empty.
Yeah, pretty damning. Let's take Karen again. The analysis sees her as a typical 90s trope.
How so?
Like, The strong woman who seems independent, but then her whole arc basically revolves around being softened by the male lead's attention, defined by the romance.
Ah, okay. Serving his story more than having her own.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And then there's Mitch, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character.
Right, the roommate.
The critique notes his transformation from skeptical and by the book to Patch's supporter feels really sudden, almost underdeveloped, not entirely convincing.
And the main antagonist, Dean Walcott, Bob Gunton.
Portrayed as just completely one note, according to the analysis. Cartoonishly rigid, just an obstacle.
No nuance there either.
Apparently not. The critique suggests it reduces the central conflict to a very simple good versus evil, without much, intellectual or ethical weight.
So, connecting back to the listener wanting thoroughness, the analysis is saying these characters are basically tools for simple emotional beats, not really fleshed out people.
Exactly. They serve the plot's needs, as the critique sees it, rather than reflecting complexity, which, raises questions about what supporting characters should do in a story based on real life.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh.
Okay, what about the direction? Tom Shadyac directed it. The critique had a phrase for the tone.
Saccharine saturation.
Right. Sugary sweet, basically.
And maybe overly so. Shadyac came from directing broad comedies like Ace Ventura.
Oh.
And the analysis suggests maybe that background led to a lack of tonal control or discipline here.
Meaning?
Well, the critique points out these really abrupt shifts. You get broad slapstick, like Patch with the bedpan on his head or the balloon animals. And then suddenly it swings into heavy melodrama, like Curran's fictional murder-suicide plotline.
Yeah, that's quite a swing.
And the analysis finds that not just jarring, but ethically questionable, given the context of real medical issues and patient suffering.
It sounds like the critique felt it lacked grounding. You mentioned quirk for quirk's sake.
Exactly. Things like filling a pool with noodles or some of the jokes. The critique argues these undermine the film's credibility. It makes it harder to take the core message about compassion seriously.
And the music. Often a big part of tone.
Oh yeah. The critique calls out the score specifically, describing it as manipulative.
How so?
Using saccharine piano and swelling orchestras to basically force the emotional response, telling the audience feel sad now or feel inspired now.
Even if the story hasn't quite built up to it naturally.
That's the argument. That the music tries to do the emotional heavy lifting that the script and characters haven't earned.
So the critique sees this excessive sentimentality running through the story, the tone, and the presentation. What about how it looks? The cinematography.
The critique labels the visual style comfortably bland.
Okay, not exactly a compliment for a film's look.
No. The analysis suggests it has this very glossy, safe, almost TV movie aesthetic, like a Hallmark special, is the comparison used.
Meaning?
Soft lighting, sets that look a bit too perfect, too clean, and this tendency to use warm golden light in the big emotional moments.
And the critique feels that. Cheapens it.
It argues it defangs their emotional impact, makes the tough stuff feel less real, less impactful, sort of smooths over any potential discomfort.
So even visually, the argument is that the film avoids anything too challenging or deep.
Precisely. It all contributes to this feeling of artificiality that the critique keeps coming back to.
Which leads us directly into the historical accuracy aspect. And here, the critique uses maybe its strongest language, a dangerous fabrication.
Yes, this is clearly a major point of contention. It highlights that the real Dr. Adams himself was unhappy with the film.
He felt misrepresented.
Yeah, he reportedly felt it just turned him into a clown, missing the substance of his work.
But the critique goes beyond his personal feelings, right? Into factual changes.
Absolutely. It points to major alterations, the biggest one being that whole Karen Fisher romance subplot.
Which we know now is fictional.
Right. But the critique emphasizes why that's such a big deal. The person who inspired that storyline, in a very loose sense, was actually a male friend of Dr. Adams who died tragically.
Oh, wow. So they changed the person's gender and relationship.
Completely. The critique says that crucial part of his real story was completely erased and replaced with a fictional romance.
That is a significant distortion. It changes the nature of the loss, the relationships, everything.
Exactly. And the critique also takes aim at how the film shows Patch practicing medicine.
How so?
It depicts him practicing without a license, maybe stealing supplies, doing things that weren't sanctioned. The film frames it as heroic rebellion.
But the critique disagrees.
Strongly. It calls this portrayal ethically irresponsible and potentially damaging. It argues that showing these actions without consequence ignores the real dangers and the importance of medical ethics and rules.
So the concern is it might give people a misleading idea about how medicine should work.
That seems to be the core worry. that it could accidentally promote a harmful view of professionalism and patient safety.
Okay, so we've covered script, characters, direction, visuals, accuracy. What about the overall themes? The messages the film is trying to send? The critique labels this simplified and exploited.
Right. It acknowledges the basic message compassionate care is important is obviously a good one.
Sure.
But the argument is that the film simplifies this message way too much. It creates this false dichotomy
Between what?
between being humane and being scientifically competent. It often paints the establishment doctors as just cold robots.
Implying you can't be both caring and follow protocols.
That's what the critique suggests the film implies. That being compassionate means breaking rules, and being professional means being cold, which is seen as a harmful narrative.
Because in reality, good healthcare needs both
Right.
compassion and competence.
Ideally, yes. And the analysis argues that the film fails to explore the complexities. Things like professional boundaries, why they exist, the intense training doctors go through, the risks of getting too emotionally involved without checks and balances.
So by simplifying, it misses the chance to explore what compassionate care really looks like within a responsible medical framework.
That's the essence of the critique's point here. It undermines its own intended message, in a way.
Okay, so let's pull it all together. The critique's final verdict seems to be pretty harsh. It calls the film a manipulative misfire.
Yes, that sums it up. The analysis concludes the film relies on aggressive sentimentality, doesn't care enough about the facts, and boils down complex ideas into simple, easy tropes.
In Robin Williams' performance.
The critique feels it gets kind of lost, buried under the film's intense need to be inspirational at all costs, even if it means twisting the truth or ignoring nuance.
So the critique argues that whatever noble intentions the film might have started with, they get lost in translation.
Pretty much. That it chooses manipulation over genuine insight. And ultimately, the analysis sees the film as a disservice to the real Dr. Adams and his actual life's work.
Wow, okay. So for our listener tuning in, the big takeaway from diving into this critique is, well, Patch Adams might be aiming for inspiration, but this analysis sees it as deeply flawed.
Yeah, across the board, basically. Writing, characters, direction, accuracy, themes. The critique finds significant issues everywhere.
And hopefully going through this analysis gives you, the listener, a much more layered view of the film than just watch it or don't watch it.
Right. If you value getting that deeper understanding, this critical perspective offers a way to think about the movie's impact and maybe the whole genre of biopics without even needing to rewatch the film itself.
It lets you engage with the ideas around the film.
Exactly. Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to maybe mull over.
Okay.
Considering everything this analysis raises, how much responsibility do filmmakers really have to the literal truth when they put based on a true story on the screen?
That's a big one.
And how does using that dramatic license, changing facts for emotional effect, end up shaping how we, the audience, understand real people and real issues?
The crucial question, isn't it? Where's that line and what happens when it gets crossed? Definitely. Welcome to the deep dive. So you were curious about that 1998 movie, Patch Adams.
Yeah, I remember it being huge, but I also heard things about how true it actually was.
Exactly. So we did a bit of digging, looking at, its accuracy, the reception, all that. The mission is sort of uncovering the real story behind the feel-good film.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
Well, right off the bat, here's something pretty wild. The real Dr. Hunter Patch Adams. He apparently hated the movie.
Yeah.
Intensely disliked it.
Oh, wow. Really? Hated it. I thought it was supposed to celebrate him.
That's what you'd think. But no, his criticism was pretty fundamental. He felt it really dumbed down his life's work.
Dumbed down how?
He said it trivialized his, serious humanitarian stuff. Basically reduced him to just a clown, his work.
A clown. Oof. He actually called it a disservice to my work.
Yeah. Which immediately makes you think, doesn't it? About Hollywood versus reality.
For sure.
Yeah.
That gap can be huge sometimes.
But, okay, here's a twist on that. While Dr. Adams felt the movie really missed the mark, Robin Williams, who played him, apparently donated a chunk of his salary from the film.
No kidding. Donated it where?
To help fund a children's hospital.
Yeah.
Sort of like, contributing to the real Patch Adams vision, even if the film wasn't quite right.
Huh. That's actually quite something. A real disconnect between the portrayal and, well, the actor's actions, maybe.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? Okay, let's dig into another big difference. The character, Karen Fisher.
Ah, the love interest. Played by Monica Potter. Right. Tragic ending.
Right. Well, the thing is, she wasn't real.
What? Not real at all.
Mostly fabricated for the film.
Yeah.
Apparently, she was very loosely based on a male friend of Adams who died.
A male friend. So the whole romance, the murder plot
I
point.
added pure Hollywood, injecting romance and tragedy, for emotional impact.
Wow. Okay, that feels like a major liberty to take. You can see why people might call that manipulative.
Definitely changes how you see that whole part of the movie. It really shows how story needs can just overwrite the facts.
Yeah. And maybe the director's background plays into this too. Tom Shadyac.
What about him?
Well, his main thing before Patch Adams was big, broad comedies. Think Ace Ventura, The Nutty Professor.
Oh, right. Okay, so this film was kind of a shift for him towards something more serious.
Exactly. And some critics, and maybe even Adams, felt you could kind of see that in the movie.
How so?
Like the tone is a bit uneven. It jumps between slapstick comedy and then really heavy melodrama.
Yeah, I can kind of picture that. Maybe it shows he was still finding his feet with that kind of nuanced drama.
Possibly. It raises questions, about matching the director to the material, especially for a biopic.
Good point. Okay, one last big thing.
Yeah.
The Gesundheit Institute.
His dream hospital, the free community one.
Yeah. The movie kind of makes it seem like it was already up and running, right? Like a functioning hospital during the story.
But it wasn't, not even close, really, when the film came out in '98.
So it's still just an idea? Or like fundraising?
Very much still in the planning and fundraising stages. It was the goal, the aspiration, but the movie presented it as, well, already achieved.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the big differences we found.
Right.
1. The real Patch Adams strongly disliked the film, felt it trivialized his work.
2. The main love interest, Karen, and her tragic story were basically invented.
3. The director, Tom Shadyac, came mainly from a background of making broad comedies.
Yeah, and 4. Adams's actual dream hospital, the Institute, wasn't built yet when the movie implied it was.
It's quite a list of discrepancies, isn't it?
It really is. It highlights just how much a film based on a true story can sometimes, stray from the actual truth or the spirit of it even.
Which kind of leads us to a final thought, maybe for everyone listening.
Okay.
Given how many liberties we're taking here, what responsibility do these kinds of films, biopics, really have? Especially when they're dealing with real people, real humanitarian work.
How accurate do they need to be?
Yeah. Does knowing all this stuff change how you feel about Patch Adams, or maybe even other biographical movies you've seen?
It's definitely something to chew on.
For sure. Well, thanks for diving deep with us on this one.